Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is the 8-hour silver chart with MACD indicators drawn in. The first thing that stands out here is that we actually have touched down to a low that is just beyond the low that we did at the May Smackdown on the MACD. So I'll draw a freehand line there. If we just touch that and draw straight across, you can see we've just gone below what we were. So we've got a turn. Now the thing you want to watch out for is that I personally think this is a bottom, partly because we don't have the same type of volume we had, but you can see you get this V volume formation. Normally when you put in some kind of bottom, you get a V volume. And I think maybe this is going to be like a V volume formation here, not quite as large, something like that. So most likely that we put in a bottom here. But one thing I wanted to point out is that when we put in the low on the MACD, you can see that we rallied and then failed across the line again. That corresponds to this rally and then a failure in actually taking out a lower price, even though the MACD is still rising. So is that possible here? Yeah, we could do that one. The same thing. We could cross up over the line, bounce, and actually go lower. I don't think that's going to happen on this one, simply because of the depth of this spike here. Normally, your bottoms always come on these types of spikes. You can see them. Spike, 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 spike. What that spike means is that the price didn't trade very long at all at that price. For example, our low at 26, and these are 5-minute markers, but it's probably even tighter than that. You can see you've got two of them there. So this one traded down and touched it, this one traded up. So maybe the price spent about 5 minutes at 26. That's probably all the time you had. Otherwise, you would have gotten in where I got in around 28, which between the 28 on the way down and 28 on the way up, and then the 28 here, you had more chances. But just these two 28s, you really only had maybe an hour, a little over an hour to buy. 2 hours from there to there. So the whole thing put together, you had most of the night. But then, of course, we came back up. So the other MACD I want to check is the daily. Now this one's important because, as I pointed out, it's made a new low. And this is not necessarily the lowest that will go, but you can see this is the lowest we have been since this begins. And that begins actually in December of 2007, which coincidentally is the beginning of the official recession. And that's the point that I wanted to segue into, is the recession and recession scare that we've been looking at. This chart here is a overlay of the SLV, which I'm using as a proxy for the price of silver. Although it's lower, it's still a good proxy, and then the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The one thing that really stands out at you when you look at this, if you remember, it was back on Thursday that we had the big gap down drop follow through. I think, if I recall, this was Bernanke's speech, which we tanked when he announced Operation Twist, and then we just kind of closed into a downward movement, and then boom, we kind of went off the cliff the next day. And so almost everyone was reading this as, we're headed into the next recession, they're going to let things deflate, it's a deflation scenario. And then of course that's when you had your first big drop in silver. The next day you had an enormous drop in silver, but you can see the stock market started to turn up. Then we had the third big drop, and the stock market was actually rallying at this point. And then today silver finally turned up, and the stock market, you can see it made back all of the losses that it had. So while silver was down almost 30%, the stock market never went below 5 or 6% and has now recovered all its gains. Why am I bringing this up? The reason I'm bringing this up is because in my mind, this was just cover this deflationary scare was just cover for them to bring down the metals and some of the commodities. If you'll note, they didn't take down oil significantly. So you can see there's really, you could look at this oil chart. Remember, look at the silver chart, which is just an incredible move, and jump over the oil chart and you'd have to say, I don't really even know what happened. This move here is larger than the move we had right there. So they're trying to portray this as a deflation situation beginning, but the market is giving tell that that's not what they say it is. So you can see in the stock market, let's pull this out to the weekly. The last big deflation scare we had, and even the 2008 panic and recession was still a deflation scare, because if you remember, partway into this, gold and then ultimately silver turned around and rallied and went way into new highs. So even this was a scare. But what's going on right now isn't even close. It's already rallying out. So it's my opinion that this was probably just cover for a silver smackdown to get JP Morgan out of their positions, or whoever it is. This is an orchestrated silver smackdown. As I pointed out yesterday, silver margins are now the highest in history as a percentage, and they outshine any market by almost threefold as far as how the margins are higher than what is required on other commodities. So that's starting to shape up into my mind, and for that reason I had some, along with my silver short on AGQ put, remember I told you I flipped around and did a long on that just to protect my position in case we didn't get a bottom where I could buy. Of course, we did get a bottom and I got out of that. But I also had some puts on a lot of stocks because I was buying into the stock market crash scenario story. I've covered on all those. I'm pretty much flat on the stock market because I'm coming to the conclusion that I don't believe them on this one. So it looks to me to be fairly orchestrated, and I am not buying into this deflation thing at this point. We'll have to see a lot more downside. And that brings me to the main story that I wanted to cover here, and I don't know if any of you have been following it, but this is the website for the Global Revolution. It is a website that's covering the Occupy Wall Street protest, which was announced by the hacker group Anonymous, and it has generated some controversy because the police have been filmed using pepper spray against nonviolent protesters, and so it's starting to get some coverage. The celebrities have now started to go down there. You've got Susan Sarandon, Michael Moore, and some others that have, Noam Chomsky apparently. So it appears to be, at least at this point, kind of a hardcore contingent of the left. Now I think that there are probably a lot of people on the right, and perhaps libertarians such as myself, who view Wall Street as a bunch of legalized criminals or pinstripe bandits or crooks. So I tend to agree with the left on this. I don't agree that markets and capitalism are bad, but I do agree with the left that Wall Street is, and the banks are filled with a bunch of crooks. So the question is, with this group down here, is what is their message and how are they going to get their message out? Now, I personally think that what their message should be is no one is too big to jail, and that what their demand should be is that we want to see bankers going to jail, and they should stick to that. There's going to be left-wingers, anarchists, communists, every stripe and every group, and disgruntled people, 911 and all kinds of stuff. But I think that if they stayed on point and occupied Wall Street and said that they want to see bankers doing a perp walk, they want to see guilty bankers going to jail, If they stuck with that message, I think that probably at least 70 to 80% of the American people across the spectrum, left and right, would agree with that position. So, do I think they're going to succeed? Probably not, but it does seem to be growing with momentum. Now, the thing that's so ironic about this is that all of these people think they can accomplish this by protesting, when in fact they probably could accomplish a lot more simply by buying physical silver. Because if the people ever started buying physical silver in mass, they could overwhelm the banking cartel so quickly that there wouldn't even be a question about it. The price would disconnect in the COMEX, the price would disconnect in the coin stores, the price would disconnect on Amex and Gainesville, as well as overseas in the Chinese market, etc. It would be a quick and ugly collapse for the banking cartel that is involved in shorting the precious metals. So that's kind of ironic that there's all of these people who are trying to change something when in fact the power that they have to change something is with them all the time. And that reminds me of, if you've ever watched, I think it's called The Secret of Oz or The Secret of Money, maybe it's The Money Masters, it's one of those videos that's out there. But if you've ever studied L. Frank Baum and his book The Wizard of Oz, and understand the Silver Story and William Jennings Bryan as the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man and all that stuff, if you understand the symbolism in that book, there's the Yellow Brick Road, which is actually gold, and this came at a time when the debates about bimetallism, etc. But the essential message of that book, if you remember in the movie series, at the very end, Dorothy comes and finds that the Wizard of Oz is actually a fraud. He's just a man behind a curtain and he's pulling a bunch of levers and he's just a big fraud. But then she finds out when he teaches her that she actually has the power to return home all the time. She's had it with her the whole time, and that's her ruby slippers. Well, many don't know that in the original book by L. Frank Baum, the ruby slippers were silver slippers. And it was the silver slippers that had the power to return Dorothy back to Kansas, or the message was that the people of America could be returned back to the original system of government and system of economic organization that brought them such great wealth in the past, and that power comes from silver. So I wanted to offer that up and let you think about that. You can research that. Just look up L. Frank Baum, The Secrets of Oz, I think is the name of the video. So it would be nice if our friends, or if you want to call them enemies, or some are calling them communists, but if these people down here on Wall Street realize that they could probably have much more effect by buying physical silver than they would by occupying Wall Street. And we'll talk to you next time.